Hey freaks, it's JJ. Welcome to my channel where I talk about rock and metal music, but more specifically where I talk about some of my favorite concept albums and the stories that go behind them. So this video has been requested a ton. It's probably one of my most requested videos on this channel, and that is Operation Mindcrime Part 2. So this isn't my favorite Queensryche album, honestly. After Promised Land, this is kind of the era of Queensryche where they kind of dropped off for me, and I didn't love this album, but I do like the story that goes behind it, and I think they did a good job storyline-wise, so I'm gonna talk about it. And before we get started though, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you want to get notified when I put out other content such as this, and also, as always, feel free to comment down below what other concept albums you want me to cover. And also, if you guys want to keep in closer contact with me and get some bonus content and like monthly emails from me, then feel free to join my Metalhead community. There'll be a link down in the description. It's really just a mailing list and, you know, just a way for me to keep in contact with you guys. Because, yeah, you guys are like my only friends. So, anyway, without further ado, let's get going on this. Okay, Operation Mindcrime Part 2, the Queensryche's 2006 album. Honestly, maybe just like a money grab. I hate it when they have a masterpiece and we should really honestly just leave it alone. But, of course, you know, sequels make money, so. I don't mean to shit on this album too much. It does have some good parts to it. But anyway, let's get going. Track 1, Fahrenheit Overture. This is just an instrumental track, and it just kind of sets the tone and the mood for the album. Basically, the storyline is the same set of characters from the first album. If you guys have not watched my video on Operation Mindcrime Part 1, feel free to go check it out. I'll put a link somewhere up here where you guys can go check that out. Otherwise, you're probably going to be a little bit lost during this video. The main character, Nikki, is again the protagonist of this story as well, but this is 18 years later. So, in track 2, Convict, it's just a little interlude introductory track, and this is Nikki being released from prison after spending 18 years in there for the murder of Mary. So then we move on to track number 3, I'm American. So Nikki is free for the first time in 18 years, and, you know, his excitement at being free is kind of smothered by the fact that he realizes that the world has not changed at all, and in fact maybe it's a little bit worse. He sees all the greed and corruption still going on around him, and really, you know, he was maybe, I don't know what he was hoping for, but he is really just becomes more downtrodden by the more he sees of the outside world, and he's probably experienced a lot of sensory overload after, you know, being released for the first time and out on the streets. He's also probably reeling from the lasting psychological trauma of basically, you know, his whole life, so he's very mentally unstable at this point. That takes us to track number 4, One Foot in Hell. This is just kind of my take on, obviously, like I say during most of my concept albums explain videos, this is just my take on the lyrics and my interpretation of them. So you may not agree with this next part, but I think that while Nikki was in prison, he suffered some sort of like mental block where he kind of shut off all his memories, and he doesn't remember, you know, Mary or Dr. X or things like that. So I think that now that he's actually back out on the streets and in familiar territory, I think that all these memories are starting to come flooding back to him. And so he's just becoming really overwhelmed with everything that's going on, and he remembers Dr. X, and then he starts thinking of Mary, and, you know, to him, Mary's death is extremely fresh in his mind, given that he's just remembered it. And so now that he's free, he has the chance to actually take revenge on Dr. X. Track number 5, Hostage. So, in my opinion, this track is Nikki thinking back on the trial that landed him in prison for Mary's murder. And he is perhaps remembering it for the first time, and he feels indignant about being locked up, and grows more and more vindictive over, you know, the realization that he spent so many years wasting away in prison with nothing he could do about getting revenge for Mary's death. Track number 6, The Hands. So, I think Nikki is suffering from a mental breakdown at this point. His paranoia has reached a high point, and it's kind of just driving him to seek out Mary, but then he realizes that she's dead, and he kind of turns his sights back on Dr. X, and his anger is just kind of festering and growing. So then he starts to develop this plan for vengeance, and it's kind of the only thing keeping him going at this point, keeping him focused and away from just giving up completely. So that takes us to track number 7, The Speed of Light. So Nicky's having a hard time adjusting, to say the least, to the world that he's been, like, thrust back into normal life, and he doesn't feel like he belongs, and he feels like everything is just moving along too fast. And he has a moment of clarity where he realizes maybe he could be going down the wrong path right now in seeking Dr. X for vengeance. But then he has this imagined conversation with Mary, who tries to counsel mercy, but Nicky decides that he's gone too far, that there's no forgiveness for him, and that he's just going to go all the way. So he decides to go seek Dr. X. Track number 8, Signs Say Go. So in the midst of Nicky's mental breakdown, he imagines Dr. X is taking over his mind again. And this is not happening, but Nicky feels like it is, and this kind of fuels him to hasten his revenge. Track number 9, Rearrange You. So invigorated by his perceived sense of justice, Nicky decides to seek out Dr. X, and he just kind of redoubles his efforts in trying to seek him. Track number 10, The Chase. This is probably my favorite track on the album, probably because it features Ronnie James Dio, and I mean, how can you not love a track with Dio on it? It may be like the only like saving grace from this album. Not to shit on this album too much. I mean, it's a good. I don't know if I say it's a good album. It's all right, but I'm sorry. It's obvious that I don't like this album. It's just such a letdown if you listen to Mindcrime and then you listen to Mindcrime Part 2. It's just not there. Anyway, I'm sorry. I digress. Anyway, Nicky finally chases down Dr. X, and he meets up with him, and they ensue in this fight. Dr. X tries to take control of Nicky's mind again, but Nicky's prepared for it, and he fends off the mind control. And so they engage in a fight, and then eventually Nicky ends up blacking out. Track number 11, Murderer, ? So when Nicky comes to, he's looking down at Dr. X's body, and he realizes that he's killed him. So Nicky is obviously very mentally unstable and suffering from probably like some kind of psychosis at this point. But he also hallucinates Dr. X waking up and casting blame on him. So Nicky is just really reeling from all this like mental illness going on right now. So Nicky's having a hard time at this moment. He's just murdered someone, and now he's starting to feel guilty over that murder. So that takes us to track 12, Circles. So Nicky is just kind of wandering aimlessly through the city. He's had his vengeance now, but it's not the relief that he was hoping to gain. He doesn't really feel any better. He doesn't feel vindicated for Mary's death. And now that he no longer has a mission at hand, he's and something to focus and keep his mind on, he's really feeling kind of lost at this point, and also probably really guilty as well. Track number 13, If I Could Change It All. So regret settles in. He's still thinking a lot about Mary's death, and he reflects on his life and all the things that he's done wrong. The one good thing in his life was Mary, and without her, he basically has no reason to live. He also feels guilty about, all the crimes he's committed, and he starts to think that, maybe by killing Dr. X, he's become the very thing that he sought to destroy. But, this is something that he can't face at the moment, and he's having a tough time in this track. Track number 14, An International Confrontation. Nicky begins to unravel even further, and he starts seeing Mary's ghost, which urges him to end it all. So he's now seeing things that aren't there, and this apparition of Mary is kind of like an evil one telling him that he should kill himself. So that takes us to track number 15, A Junkie's Blues. So if you don't remember, Nicky was a drug addict in the first Operation Mindcrime, and so I think this is him wanting to seek oblivion in the form of maybe like an overdose or something. So he's contemplating suicide and looking back at all his mistakes, but then a tiny part of him thinks that maybe he can become a better man, maybe he can do better, but then Mary's ghost arrives and kind of just smothers this idea of him turning his life around, and she pushes him toward giving up. The Fear City Slide. So Nicky hears voices that urge him to put a gun to his head, and he's still hesitant. A little part of him doesn't want to do it, but the voices end up making him pull the trigger, and he kills himself. So if I were to insert my writer brain onto this part of the story, which I tend to do quite often, sorry, I would say that the reason that Nicky ends up killing himself at the end is because it was a fail-safe to Dr. X's brainwashing. So, hang with me here. So when Nikki meets up with Dr. X is like very confident, despite being threatened with, death basically. Dr. X, I think, is so conceited because he knew that if Nikki killed him, there was an implement in the brainwashing that would make Nikki take his own life afterward. So when Nikki hears these voices, or when he sees visions of Mary urging him to kill himself, maybe could that have been a seed that Dr. X implanted into his mind years ago? So when we get to this final track, All the Promises, one of the line comes that says, all the promises, just another lie. And I could see this as being Nikki realizing that he was tricked by Dr. X. But that's just my theory there. Anyway, to finish up this track, with number 17, All the Promises, like I said, Nikki and Mary end up meeting up with each other in death. And perhaps they find some kind of solace in their own little pocket of the afterlife. So the story has kind of a happy-ish ending, maybe. But basically, I think the moral of the story is to seek help if you are going through mental illness, and to not listen to the voices in your head. Anyway, thank you for listening to my rendition of Operation Mindcrime Part 2. Again, as always, these are just my interpretation, and you may have a different interpretation of the lyrics, so feel free to drop that down in the comments. I would love to hear what your opinions are. Also, feel free to suggest other concept albums and videos that you want me to do. And don't forget to sign up for my Metalhead newsletter if you want to get monthly newsletters from me with bonus content and my random thoughts and opinions, as well as bonus videos as well. Anyway, thanks for watching, freaks. Till next time.